Over 60, top 7 nighttime foods that repair eyes while you sleep. Let me ask you something shocking. Did you know that 99% of people over 60 are slowly damaging their eyes every single night without realizing it? That's right. While you sleep, your eyes are supposed to repair themselves. But if you're missing just a few key nutrients before bedtime, the repair process never finishes. Instead, your vision quietly declines, and one morning you wake up wondering why the world looks a little dimmer, a little blurrier than it did yesterday. Most people believe poor eyesight is simply part of aging. Others think stronger glasses or surgery are the only answers. But here's the twist. Science now shows that specific foods, eaten at night, can fuel your eye's natural repair system and actually slow or even stop that decline. Some of these foods are so powerful they can cut the risk of blindness from macular degeneration by nearly 40%. And the best part, they're not exotic, expensive, or hard to find. They're sitting in your local grocery store right now. Now, some of you might be nodding, thinking, yes, Doc, food makes sense. But I know others are skeptical. Come on, can a handful of fruit or a simple vegetable really make a difference? Trust me, by the time we finish this video, you'll never look at your evening snack the same way again. But before we jump into the countdown of the top 7 nighttime foods that can repair your eyes while you sleep, I need you to do one quick thing: hit that like button, share this video with a friend who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep bringing you real, science-backed health secrets that most people will never hear about. Stay with me, because number 1 on this list is a food so common you probably ate it this week. And yet it may be the single most powerful protector of your vision for the years ahead. Why the night matters most for your eyes. Most people think vision problems come from the strain of reading, driving, or staring at screens all day. But the truth is, most of the real repair work for your eyes doesn't happen when you're awake, it happens while you sleep. At night, your body shifts into repair mode. Cells regenerate, blood vessels restore themselves, and your brain activates the glymphatic system, a natural cleansing process that flushes out waste products, including those linked to eye diseases like macular degeneration and glaucoma. Your eyes, in particular, are some of the most energy-demanding organs in the body. The retina, ounce for ounce, uses more oxygen than almost any other tissue, which means it relies heavily on a steady supply of nutrients to repair itself. Without antioxidants, vitamins, and healthy fats circulating in your bloodstream at night, the repairs simply can't be completed. That's when damage starts to build up, and you wake with eyes that feel dry, heavy, or blurry. Research supports this. A study in JAMA Ophthalmology found that adults with lower levels of protective nutrients such as vitamins A, C, and E faced nearly double the risk of vision decline. The National Eye Institute also confirmed that nutrient gaps, especially at night, accelerate age-related macular degeneration. I've seen it in my own patients as well. One man in his 70s often skipped dinner or ate nothing more than toast before bed. He complained that his vision was cloudy every morning. Once he began adding a light evening snack, something simple like Greek yogurt with blueberries, his morning clarity improved noticeably. Think of it this way: your body is a construction crew. During the day, wear and tear happens. At night, the crew comes in to make repairs. But if they don't have the right tools, nutrients like lutein, omega-3s, or vitamin A, the work can't get done. Over time, the cracks widen and the damage grows. That's why nighttime nutrition is so important. It's not just about what you eat, it's about when you eat it. And a small, nutrient-rich snack before bed can make all the difference in how your eyes feel and function the next morning. Food number 7, cherries, the sleep and eye repair fruit. Cherries may look like a simple snack, but when it comes to eye health after 60, they're one of nature's hidden gems. They are especially rich in melatonin, the hormone that signals your body it's time to rest. Why does this matter for your eyes? Because quality sleep isn't just about feeling refreshed, it's the foundation of deep repair cycles. When you sleep soundly, your retinas get the oxygen and nutrients they need to recover from the day's constant visual stress. On top of melatonin, cherries are loaded with anthocyanins, the compounds that give them their rich red color. These antioxidants protect the fragile blood vessels in your eyes from oxidative stress and inflammation. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition found that anthocyanins improve microcirculation, which means better delivery of oxygen and nutrients directly to the retina. Another piece of research from Michigan State University suggested that tart cherry juice helped reduce oxidative markers in older adults within just a few weeks, proof that these tiny fruits work quickly once they are part of your routine. I've seen this in my own patients. Margaret, 72, struggled with dry eyes and blurry mornings. I suggested tart cherries before bed. Within weeks, she wasn't just sleeping better, her eyes felt less gritty, and her ophthalmologist confirmed that her tear film had stabilized. Another patient, John, a retired bus driver, told me he often woke up at 3 a.m. and couldn't get back to sleep. He started drinking a small glass of tart cherry juice at night. Not only did his sleep improve, but he also noticed less strain when reading in the mornings. Sometimes, the simplest foods solve the most frustrating problems. It raises an important question. How often do we think of food as medicine for our eyes, rather than just fuel for our bodies? Too many seniors rely on eye drops or stronger glasses without realizing that part of the solution might already be sitting in their fruit bowl. My advice is practical. Keep a small portion of cherries or a few ounces of tart cherry juice as your evening snack. Frozen cherries work just as well as fresh, and unsweetened juice is widely available. For many of my patients, this one change has helped them fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and wake up with eyes that feel clearer and less strained. So the next time you find yourself reaching for cookies or chips before bed, ask yourself, what if a handful of cherries could not only help you sleep better, but also protect your vision for years to come? Food number 6, almonds, the vitamin E powerhouse. Almonds may seem simple, but for aging eyes, they are a quiet powerhouse. Just 1 ounce, about a small handful, provides nearly half of your daily requirement of vitamin E. This fat-soluble antioxidant acts like a protective shield, guarding eye cells from oxidative stress, the process that damages proteins and lipids in the lens and retina. Over time, oxidative stress is one of the driving forces behind cataracts and age-related macular degeneration. The age-related eye disease study, known as ARDS, followed thousands of older adults and found that those who consumed enough vitamin E had a 25% lower risk of developing advanced macular degeneration. That is not a minor number. That is the difference between maintaining independence and losing central vision. Almonds also bring more than vitamin E to the table. They provide healthy fats that improve the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins like A and E, both essential for vision. They also supply magnesium, which supports healthy blood flow to the eyes, and protein, which helps stabilize blood sugar levels overnight. Stable blood sugar means fewer spikes that can stress the tiny blood vessels in your retina. A study from Tufts University even linked higher nut consumption with slower rates of cognitive and vision decline in older adults, showing how closely the health of the eyes and the brain are connected. I've seen these benefits in practice. Robert, 69, with a family history of macular degeneration, began eating a handful of almonds in the evening instead of cookies. 2 years later, his eye scans were stable with no progression, something his doctor said was unusual given his family background. Another patient, Evelyn, age 74, had early cataracts and often complained of glare when driving at night. After incorporating almonds into her daily diet, sometimes plain, sometimes mixed into yogurt, she reported that glare sensitivity was noticeably less bothersome. Her ophthalmologist confirmed her cataracts were not advancing as quickly as expected. Now, let me ask you, when you think about a nighttime snack, do you consider how it will affect your eyes 10 years from now? Most people focus on taste or convenience, but small choices like swapping chips for almonds can have long-term payoffs for your vision. My advice is simple. Keep a small container of unsalted almonds in your pantry. A handful before bed is enough to supply the vitamin E your eyes need to fight oxidative stress through the night. It's a small investment today for clearer, stronger vision tomorrow. Food number 5, carrots and sweet potatoes, the beta-carotene duo. Carrots and sweet potatoes are more than just colorful additions to your plate. They are rich sources of beta-carotene, a powerful antioxidant that your body converts into vitamin A. Vitamin A is essential for the function of the rods in your retina, the cells responsible for night vision. Without enough vitamin A, even simple tasks like recognizing faces in dim light or driving after sunset can become a challenge. In fact, one of the earliest warning signs of deficiency is night blindness. The World Health Organization has reported that vitamin A supplementation reduces night blindness in older adults by more than 50%, showing just how critical this nutrient is for maintaining vision in low-light conditions. Carrots and sweet potatoes are also packed with fiber and antioxidants that protect against oxidative stress, another major contributor to cataracts and macular degeneration. Sweet potatoes, in particular, have one of the highest concentrations of beta-carotene among commonly eaten vegetables. Research published in the Archives of Ophthalmology found that people who consumed diets high in vitamin-rich foods had a significantly lower risk of developing advanced age-related macular degeneration. This means that what seems like a humble vegetable side dish could actually be acting as your body's natural defense against vision loss. I often remind my patients that preparation matters. Beta-Carotene is fat-soluble, which means your body absorbs it more efficiently when paired with healthy fats. A drizzle of olive oil, a sprinkle of nuts, or a slice of avocado can make all the difference. Linda, age 74, is a perfect example. She began roasting sweet potatoes in olive oil a few nights a week. Within a short time, she noticed less difficulty driving at night, and her confidence on the road returned. Another patient, Harold, age 70, told me he used to avoid evening walks because he felt unsteady in dim light. After adding carrots and sweet potatoes to his regular meals, he reported clearer night vision and greater ease moving around outdoors after sunset. So the question becomes, are you giving your eyes what they need to adapt to the dark? Many people assume vision decline at night is just an unavoidable part of aging, but in truth, it's often a signal that the eyes are running low on key nutrients. By adding something as simple as roasted sweet potatoes or a carrot soup to your dinner table, you give your retinas the raw material they need to perform their job when the lights go down. These everyday foods are proof that protecting your night vision doesn't always come from a pill bottle. It can come from what's already on your plate. Food number 4. Salmon, the omega-3 protector. Salmon is more than just a tasty entree. It is one of the most powerful foods you can eat for long-term eye health. Fatty fish like salmon are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, particularly DHA and EPA. DHA is especially critical because it makes up nearly half of the fatty acids in your retina's photoreceptors, the very cells that allow you to capture light and send images to your brain. Without a steady supply of DHA, those cells weaken, which can lead to blurry vision, dry eyes, and an increased risk of macular degeneration. A large Harvard study that followed over 38,000 women found that those who regularly consumed omega-3 rich fish had a 42% lower risk of developing age-related macular degeneration. That is a staggering number for something as simple as including salmon in your diet. The benefits don't stop there. Omega-3s reduce inflammation, improve tear production, and protect the small blood vessels that keep your retina nourished. Research published in Investigative Ophthalmology and Visual Science showed that patients with higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids had healthier tear film and significantly less irritation from dry eye disease. In practice, I've seen these results come to life. George, 76, had battled severe dry eye for years, relying on artificial tears multiple times a day. Once he began eating salmon twice a week, his symptoms improved so much that he cut his use of drops by half. Another patient, Mary, a retired teacher, told me she struggled with constant burning and redness in her eyes. After incorporating baked salmon into her weekly meals, her discomfort eased, and her eye doctor noted healthier corneal tissue. So let me ask you, when you think about protecting your eyes, do you ever think about what's on your dinner plate? Many seniors focus on eye drops or stronger glasses, but overlook how vital nutrition is for vision. A fillet of salmon a couple of nights a week is not just heart healthy, it's eye healthy. For those who don't enjoy fish, high-quality fish oil supplements can be an alternative, but I always remind patients that whole foods bring additional nutrients that pills cannot match. My advice is simple. Try to include salmon or another fatty fish such as sardines or mackerel at least twice a week. Prepare it grilled, baked, or broiled, and pair it with vegetables for a meal that supports not only your vision but your overall well-being. Clearer eyes, fewer symptoms of dryness, and a reduced risk of macular degeneration. Those are benefits worth sitting down to dinner for. Food number 3, eggs, the lutein and zeaxanthin bomb. Eggs have been misunderstood for decades, but when it comes to eye health, they are one of the most valuable foods you can eat. The yolks are rich in lutein and zeaxanthin, 2 carotenoids that concentrate in the macula, the central part of the retina responsible for sharp, detailed vision. These compounds act like internal sunglasses, filtering harmful blue light from screens and sunlight, while also neutralizing oxidative stress that gradually damages eye cells. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition showed that eating just 1 egg a day significantly raised lutein and zeaxanthin levels in older adults without negatively impacting cholesterol in most cases. That makes eggs not only safe, but highly effective for seniors who want to protect their vision. Studies have also shown that higher macular pigment density, fueled by lutein and zeaxanthin, is linked to a lower risk of age-related macular degeneration and better visual performance, especially in low-light conditions. In practice, I've seen these benefits firsthand. Sarah, 71, added a soft-boiled egg with leafy greens to her nightly routine. Within a year, her macular pigment density improved and her vision stabilized, giving her peace of mind after a worrying diagnosis of early degeneration. Another patient, Bill, age 68, worked long hours on his computer and complained of eye strain and glare. After incorporating eggs into his diet several times a week, he reported less discomfort from screens and sharper vision when reading fine print. So let me ask you, when you think about protecting your eyes from harmful light, do you immediately think of buying special glasses, or do you consider what's on your plate? Many people are quick to spend money on filters and lenses, while overlooking the nutrients that strengthen the eyes from within. My advice is straightforward. Enjoy eggs regularly, but prepare them simply. Boiled, poached, or lightly scrambled eggs preserve their carotenoids better than frying at high heat. Pairing them with vegetables like spinach or kale further boosts absorption. The truth is, one egg a day can be an inexpensive, natural way to defend your macula against damage, stabilize your vision, and even improve how your eyes perform under stress. For seniors worried about long-term vision, this is one of the smartest and easiest dietary habits you can adopt. Food number 2, blueberries, the tiny vision shield. Blueberries may be small, but they are loaded with powerful nutrients that help protect aging eyes. They are rich in anthocyanins, the pigments that give them their deep blue color, and vitamin C, which together strengthen collagen, support blood vessel health, and improve circulation in the retina. By reducing capillary fragility, blueberries help ensure that oxygen and nutrients reach the delicate tissues of the eye. This is especially important for seniors, as weakened microcirculation can accelerate vision decline. A well-known study from Tufts University found that blueberries slowed both cognitive and visual decline in older adults, highlighting how the same compounds that protect the brain also protect the eyes. Another clinical trial in Japan showed that blueberry extract improved glare-related night vision, allowing participants to see more comfortably in low-light conditions. In my practice, I've often recommended blueberries to patients struggling with vision challenges. Helen, age 80, had given up night driving because glare from headlights made her feel unsafe. After 3 months of including blueberries in her nightly snack, sometimes fresh, sometimes frozen in yogurt, she regained the confidence to drive to her granddaughter's evening recitals. Another patient, Frank, 73, complained of frequent eye fatigue after reading. By adding half a cup of blueberries to his breakfast and a small portion before bed, he noticed less strain and sharper vision when focusing on text. The science is clear, but the lesson is simple. Nourishing your eyes doesn't always require a prescription. Blueberries are easy to add to your routine, whether blended into a smoothie, sprinkled over oatmeal, or eaten as an evening treat. And here's something to consider. When was the last time you thought of fruit as a form of daily eye protection rather than just a snack? Too often, we separate food from medicine, when in reality, foods like blueberries serve as one of nature's most effective shields for the eyes. My advice is to make blueberries a regular part of your diet, not just an occasional indulgence. Over time, the benefits build, protecting your night vision, supporting circulation, and helping your eyes stay resilient well into your later years. Food number 1, kale and spinach, the macula's best friends. When it comes to protecting vision after 60, few foods can match the power of kale and spinach. These leafy greens are the richest natural sources of lutein and zeaxanthin, 2 carotenoids that concentrate in the macula, the part of the retina responsible for sharp, central vision. Acting as natural filters, they block harmful blue light and neutralize free radicals that slowly damage the eye over time. The landmark ARDS-2 study found that people with higher intake of lutein and zeaxanthin had up to a 40% lower risk of progressing to advanced age-related macular degeneration, one of the leading causes of blindness in older adults. That's not a small difference. That's life-changing protection from foods that cost just a few dollars a week. Kale and spinach also deliver vitamin K, magnesium, and nitrates that improve circulation to the eyes, keeping retinal tissues well supplied with oxygen and nutrients. A study in nutrients showed that diets high in these carotenoid-rich vegetables were linked not only to lower rates of macular degeneration, but also to better contrast sensitivity, meaning patients could distinguish shapes and details more easily, especially in low light. In my practice, I've seen this repeatedly. Mrs. Johnson, 78, a retired librarian, was devastated when she was told she was at high risk for AMD. We added kale and spinach to her meals several times a week, sometimes sautéed with garlic, sometimes blended into smoothies. 2 years later, her risk factors had stabilized, and she was still reading her favorite mystery novels every night. Another patient, Henry, 72, began adding spinach to his morning omelet. Over time, he noticed that the glare from headlights while driving at night wasn't nearly as blinding as before, something his eye doctor credited to the increase in macular pigment. It raises an important question. When you think about protecting your vision, are you reaching first for supplements, or are you considering the foods on your plate? While supplements can help in certain cases, the body absorbs lutein and zeaxanthin especially well when they come from whole foods paired with healthy fats like olive oil or avocado. That's why I encourage my patients to treat leafy greens not as a side dish, but as the centerpiece of their diet. Simple choices like a kale salad with dinner or steamed spinach alongside fish can provide the macula with the protection it needs to stay strong. Sometimes the greatest defense against vision loss is not found in a prescription, but in a bowl of greens you prepare at home. So let's wrap this up. Tonight we uncovered the truth that most people over 60 never hear. Your eyes don't just fade because of age, they fade because they're starving for the right fuel at the right time. Cherries, almonds, carrots, and sweet potatoes, salmon, eggs, blueberries, and those mighty greens like kale and spinach. These aren't just foods, they're medicine nature designed specifically for your vision. They help your eyes repair themselves while you sleep, so you can wake up clearer, sharper, and more confident facing the day. Now think about this. If such simple foods can slow macular degeneration, improve night vision, and reduce dry eye, what could happen if you actually start making them a consistent part of your routine? The power to protect your sight doesn't rest in a pill bottle. It starts in your kitchen, and it starts with the choices you make tonight. I want to thank you for spending this time with me. If you found this video valuable, please hit that like button, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe so you don't miss the next breakthrough in health and longevity. Every click helps us bring more life-changing information straight to you. Take care of your vision, take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, here's to brighter mornings, clearer nights, and healthier eyes for life.